Hey, what's up guys? Zach with Wired Customs, and today we're going to be doing an early Ford flathead Q&A. These are basically the most asked questions that I got, or the most asked questions I got recently, and I probably get somewhere around 100 emails a week. I don't get an opportunity to respond to them all. That's not including Facebook Messenger and Instagram Messenger, but I get a lot of questions, so I'm going to start asking or answering these questions on videos. So if you guys want to ask me a question, put it down in the comment section. It'll be on next week's video. Maybe I'll do these every Wednesday. Depends how often I get questions, but when I get them, I'll upload them and post these videos. So flathead early Ford Q&A. So let's go down the list of the questions that I have here. So when converting to 12 volt, what do you do with your gauges? Now, I did a video on this, but a lot of people have missed it, but there is a voltage reducer specific to gauges. Gauge is a little more sensitive than a light bulb. So if you're putting voltage reducer on a horn or a light bulb, you need a little bit more voltage reducer specific to gauges, just because they're more sensitive. There's not going to be arcs or spikes or anything like that. So I highly recommend the voltage reducer from Vintage Auto Garage. It's specifically for gauges, but remember, an ammeter does not care how much voltage a gauge has. So hook up the ammeter directly to 12 volts, exactly how it was hooked up before. It does not care how many voltage it is. Next question, how do I flush a flathead engine block? So if it's a running, driving flathead, drain it out completely. A lot of guys fill it back up with vinegar, let it sit for a couple days. After it sits, flush it out with a hose in your driveway. Get it real nice and clean. Do that multiple times. I've also seen other guys do that. Warm the engines up. I would not want to run the motor with vinegar through the water pumps unless you're getting ready to replace water pumps. That's something I haven't tried, but I have tried putting vinegar, letting it sit for a couple days, then flushing it back out. So keep that in mind, give that a thought. I never tell anybody what to do with their vehicle. I just give them some suggestions, some information, but the vinegar trick is known to work. All right, flathead overheating. I get this question a lot. I get this question a couple times a week. So this has a lot to do with almost everything on the car. So first thing you need to look at, obviously, is your coolant okay? Do you have enough coolant in it? I hate to say that out loud, but sometimes we have to look into that and guys figure out they don't have enough. And you can flush it out like we just talked about, clean out that radiator as best as possible, clean out the block as best as possible. But probably like 65% of the time, it's usually guys' ignition timing and fuel and air ratio when it comes to a flathead overheating. So if the air fuel ratio is incorrect, it's going to overheat. If your timing is incorrect, it's going to overheat. A flathead, just how the cylinders are set up with the heads and how heat rises into it, it's just prone to overheating if one of those aspects are incorrect. You guys need to get really, really good at reading spark plugs. And sometimes you can put a tail sniffer inside your tailpipe, see what your air fuel ratio is doing. Some of us who are really, really specific and tedious with our flatheads, we actually have an O2 bung hiding underneath the car somewhere. Don't be afraid to put a O2 sensor on each side of your exhaust that's running out the back. You have plenty of space to hide that underneath the car. Put these gauges inside the glove box, guys. These are pretty affordable. O2 sensor is a little bit more expensive. The gauge is pretty affordable. Hooking an O2 sensor up is even easier now than it's ever been. There's a whole sleeve. All you have to do is drill a hole, screw the sleeve down. You don't even have to weld it. You can actually bolt on O2 sensors now and not get an exhaust leak. But of course, weld a bung on. Put those gauges inside your glove box. So when you're doing your routine maintenance, your checkups, flatheads are very hands-on, guys. You got to be heads-on. Pop that glove box open, drive it around the block, see what the air fuel ratio is doing, and adjust it accordingly. So it's important to know the actual numbers, but if you don't know the numbers, at least read your spark plugs as often as you can. Get that air fuel ratio correct, and also read it for timing. The way that armature burns is actually going to show you a little bit more on timing. What I like to do when I'm timing my flathead is I drive it a lot, time it a little bit, see where I can get the most power out of it just by driving it. And once it has the most power, it typically is in the right ballpark range. And that timing being incorrect will cause it to overheat every time. So it's a lot to look into for just an overheating issue. But if your flathead's overheating, guys, that's what you need to be looking at. Air fuel ratio and timing. Really, really big differences just from little changes. You'll feel it in the seat just from changing those to get a little bit more accurate. What year is my flathead? So this is a question I get more than anything else. People just want to know what year it is. I mean, I get it. You kind of just need to know what basic model it is, and you can order parts without and making sure that your new parts are going to fit. So I think guys should be really worried about what model parts are going to fit on it. When it comes to what flathead, they change so much in between the years. I could tell you the specific models and year ranges, which is like technically like 23 different specific models, but then there's only like a handful of base model changes. Block, where the coolant ports are, water pumps are, if it has bell housing or not. That's a very detailed question. So check out, I've posted an article on Rod and Styles website showing you picture evidence of the difference in all the different blocks. I don't go down the rabbit hole of every single model because there was almost a new model every other year, but the blocks themselves were the same throughout the years. They'll change a model number just because they changed the distributor on it. Something simple like that. One year they went from a 94 to a 97. They changed the model technically, but it's still a 59AB. It's just a different distributor. So don't let flatheads get overcomplicated to you guys. There's only a handful of base model differences when it comes to the block, bell housing, stuff like that. Watch those videos that I've posted, read the articles. There's a lot of information condensed down in a short period of time, and you know, make sure to check that out and do your homework on that. So it's a good question. You know, it's a good question. That's where I started out when I got a flathead. I didn't grow up with flatheads. I got into them because I thought they looked cool. So that was my first question too. What year is my flathead? Trouble balancing my tires that are bias ply. So one thing, as time progresses and we get more advanced technology, we start to figure out what the old technology was in the first place. So these are bias plies that I have on here. They have tubes in them. The cross hatch pattern weave of X weave of whatever you call that, the steel that's inside the tire. That's why it's a bias ply, because it's an X weave. When it comes to balancing these, how they used to balance them was on this big machine that would cut the tread off. Now, once these are made, or however they're made, I don't know the specifics of the process, but what I can tell you is they're not perfectly round and they're not perfectly centered to the center of the hub. The tire could be taller here, could be lower there. Old school way to do it was that they put this on a big machine and they would cut down the tire so it's a true round tire. That's the only way to get these really, really balanced, because after you shave it, then you can add your weights on like normal and get a good balance out of it. That's just the downside to running bias plies, which a lot of us really, really love to do. You know, this is not really a 60 mile an hour for 3 hours on a road trip type tire, but it can be done if you can find someone that will balance these tires the old school way. That's something I really wanted to get ever since I've been doing these early Fords, is one of those machines that shaves these tires. I haven't had the space for it yet. It's a pretty big machine, but I'll get it eventually, and I'll show you guys how that works once I get my machine. Can I run 59 AB heads on my ABA? So for those who don't know, this is a 59 AB head with the coolant passage in the center, and people like to run these on the later flatheads because they want the more traditional look. And to each his own, however you like it, but you can do it. The APA has an extra coolant port up here on the top that the 59 does not have. So when you put this head on that block, that coolant port will be sticking out. So what you do is you drill it and tap it for an MPT plug. It's the same type of plug that you'd see on aluminum intake on later models. And just drill it and tap it. Permatex, screw it in. It's blocked. You can run the old heads. With that being said, I do have to also say that the ABA runs more efficient. It has more efficient coolant passages than the 59 AB does. So just as information, if you go back years on the head, you're also going back years on technology and cooling capabilities. You're kind of reducing your cooling capabilities, but that's all up to you guys. That's your choice. But just want to let you know that's how you accomplish that. I get this question a lot. A cotter pin on my oil pan, it's leaking oil. How do I seal this? What's the issue? There's a cotter pin on the back side of the oil pan on a 59 AB. This cotter pin, it goes right above it is the flywheel. So we're not actually inside the oil pan with that cotter pin. That cotter pin is only where the pressure plate and everything is right there. So what that cotter pin there is for is when your rear main leaks, because these older motors don't have rear mains like a modern motor does. They kind of expected them to leak when they're brand new. So what this cotter pin does, as our oil leaks, the cotter pin actually grabs that oil and lets it drip outside of that area, so you don't get oil inside your clutch and pressure plate, and then you won't be able to drive the car if that got all oily. So that is specifically for draining oil outside of that little area right there. So that's okay if that's leaking oil. If it's leaking a lot of oil, it's not okay. Drop the pin and fix it. But you know, flatheads, they tend to leak. Some of them that we've done really good jobs on, they don't leak at all. But I'd say more than half of them are probably going to leak right there. Just try to keep that as clean as you can. I spray my cotter pin off every once in a while so it doesn't build up anything. But that is completely normal. If your cotter pin's not there, it kind of makes a little bubble effect, a little bit of pressurized area. I'm not really sure exactly how it works, but it'll actually build up with oil in there. It doesn't want to drain, but as soon as you poke a stick up through it, all of a sudden all that oil will come out. I ran into that situation a lot. That cotter pin somehow grabs that oil and allows it to drain through it and dripping, opposed to just creating a weird bubble and not dripping ever. So make sure your cotter pin's there. Keep it really, really clean, as silly as that sounds. The cleaner it is, the faster that oil will drip out of there and not have any problems. And you know, that's just, it is what it is. Old technology, that's what we're working with. People will send me only a picture of the casting on the back of the engine block, a casting number, and ask me what year flathead do I have. I would say 99% of flatheads, the casting marks are no information to us. On 99% of flatheads, the casting marks, that, like, so if it had 8176543 or whatever it is on the back of it, that casting mark is a number for the mold that block was molded in. So when this block got down the line to the machinists that were machining the block, and they found issues with, you know, the mold degrading and issues of the casting, they know what mold to pull out and repair that mold number. So that's what that number was there for. It was only for the assembly line. And I think almost all of that information's been lost. I mean, this was just everyday manufacturing. They, you know, once it got out of the shop, that casting number didn't mean anything as it was out in public. So I don't know anybody that has that information. If you do, please let me know. But that number was only for the assembly line, to let them know what molds to repair. Now, there's only a few flatheads that actually have anything in it that actually helps you identify it. Obviously, everybody knows the 59 on the bell housing. Canada did like C59, C81. It just lets you know it's a Canadian block. It was made in Canada, and it was the 59AB or 81. That, let's see what else. The other one, maybe a 99A on the intake surface. Outside from that, there was no other really significant numbers on the block. Of course, the heads had every single number you can imagine, even had firing orders and all sorts of stuff on the heads. But when it comes to the block, there's not very many numbers that actually give us any information at all. So especially stamped numbers. Ford didn't stamp numbers on these, rebuilders did, and that's how they warrantied out blocks. So, you know, this is good for this long. They brought it back. It had the actual stamp number with their stars on the side to let them know that, yes, it was them who rebuilt it and not someone just trying to flip motors. So that's what those stamped intake numbers were. No significance to us now at this point in time, other than the 99A, and I think that's about the only one I can think of right now. 99A on the intake surface. I don't think anything else ever had anything on the intake surface. Oh, I get a lot of pictures of cracks in blocks. A typical place for a block to crack that's been sitting with coolant in it for a long time is the oil pan rails. They'll crack right there. That crack is a terrible crack. For some people, it's block life ending. Some people, it's not. There's some old school farmer guys around here still that are really good at stitch welding, stuff like that. I've seen that work successfully. And if that's something that you're willing to pay for, by all means, go for it. Flathead blocks are pretty cheap right now, because 50-50 if they're good or not. It's up to you if you want to try to repair it or not in that area. Also, the cracks on the head studs. People joke saying that was a stock option. So they came like that, which I'm sure some of them did, or a lot of them did. I'm not sure because I wasn't there inspecting the blocks, but that's such a common crack. When we see them, we don't even worry about it. We just keep going. The only time is when that crack is really, really bad and a head stud won't actually be able to be torqued because that crack will split open, and then you have to helicoil it or have someone stitch weld that up. That's not something that I can do myself. I've never done that before. So check into your local machinist shop and see if they're capable of doing that kind of work. But the one that's definitely a dead block crack is a crack between cylinders and a crack between the valves and the cylinder itself. Now, it's really typical for every cylinder in a flathead to be sleeved, so don't be worried when you see sleeves inside of a flathead. I have a couple blocks where the whole block was sleeved stock. That's how it came. They sleeved it in the factory. So some people say, you know, you can stitch weld that crack and sleeve it, because technically that crack isn't going to go all the way to the piston. I haven't personally seen anyone do that successfully, because I mean, 1 or 2 years down the road, you could run into issues. You put all that money into that block, like your whole assembly, you know, rotating assembly, everything, then you're gonna have issues with it. Oh man, that's really frustrating, because a lot of money goes into flatheads. So I would recommend to stay away from cracks that goes from cylinder to cylinder or from valve to cylinder. Look for another one. If you're building one and you're just going through blocks, keep looking. If you have a running driving motor and you notice a crack there, I mean, you probably could just keep running it until you run into an issue. Maybe you won't run into an issue for 5 years, you know, you might just driving this thing in parades or local car shows. But if you're building it, you know, keep looking. That's not a good crack. Here's one I got recently, and it's worth stating and bringing up. PowerMaster not charging at idle. Now, the PowerMaster does not charge at idle. The RPM is too low. The PowerMaster isn't really a flathead specific alternator. It's kind of like a 2017 Chevy Camaro alternator inside of a special case. So they didn't build this alternator just for flatheads. All they did was put a case on the outside of the alternator they already had to make it look old school. I'm running the PowerMaster. I absolutely love it. I think it looks great. I would much rather run a PowerMaster than an alternator, but they will not charge at idle. There's not enough engine RPM to spin that armature fast enough to turn on the little thing on the inside that tells it charge. So that's just what it is. I try to set my idle somewhere a little bit higher than normal because I'm running a PowerMaster, to where if I pull the choke, it gives it just enough RPM to turn it on and start charging it. That's how I like to set it up. Technically, in neutral on a warm day, it is idling a little bit faster than it needs to be. That's okay with me, because on a cold day when I start it up and I walk away from it 10 minutes, you know, I want to make sure it's charging and not about to die and kill the battery and not run at all. Especially if you guys are actually driving this in the wintertime. That's up to you. That's your choice. But that's the information you need to know. PowerMaster is not going to charge at idle or a flathead idle, stock idle. You're going to have to give it a little bit of engine RPM. Now, it does have a secondary bolt on the back of it for a ground. Keep that in mind when you're having charging problems with the PowerMaster, because the PowerMaster is either running fast enough to charge or there's a bad ground. That's the reason why that's not charging. So keep that in mind. Vintage Auto Garage has alternators for flatheads that are black, and they're not that nasty, ugly aluminum that we hate seeing, that ugly aluminum alternator. The black looks a lot nicer. I've run that on a couple fat fendered Fords. I really like it. So what it has is a trigger wire. The trigger wire is going to go back to the ignition switch. You turn the ignition on, it's going to be charging whenever the ignition's on in the car. So obviously, sitting at idle, the ignition's on, it's going to be charging the battery. So it gives you two options of, do you want to go for the looks or do you want to go for the functionality on your vehicle? At least it's not some big ugly alternator with a voltage. I hate those voltage regulators on the firewall. For some reason, I hate opening a hood of a car and see a voltage regulator on the firewall. Those are not needed anymore. Let's see, last question that I have written down here. What's better, Pertronix or points? Now, this is a big argument more than it is in a discussion. So I'm gonna say they're both good. They both run well. I've raced my flathead with points for a long time, and now I finally got the E-Fire for mine. I've been running the E-Fire on a lot of customer cars. I'm very happy, which if you don't know, the E-Fire is a Pertronix built by Stromberg. So it's a Stromberg name brand distributor, top to bottom. I've been really, really happy with it. It's been timed almost perfectly every single time. Super close to being almost perfect when it comes to timing on it. You literally just bolt the ride up, start your car up, and drive off. It's great distributor. But when it comes to which one's better, it kind of turns into what you're going to be using the car for. If you're just going to be driving it around on the street, points are just fine. If you're going to get any RPM into the motor, you want to hot rod it a little bit, have a little bit of fun, maybe go to, you know, a local drag race every once in a while, just for fun. Obviously, we know flatheads aren't for super horsepower racing, right? Because they're not ever going to have that much horsepower. But, you know, Pertronix are going to work better with higher RPM unless you get a points racing distributor. There's a couple old school ones like Malroy. I think they still sell dual points racing distributor. It's going to keep the points from floating at higher RPM. So you can have that option as still running old school points, or do you want a new Pertronix? Now, what's great about Stromberg's Pertronix, it's not some big red cap, ugly looking thing. It looks exactly, for the 59 ABs, it looks exactly like a Crab distributor. Black cap, 2 wires that come out of it, go to each side of the coil, the negative side of the coil, the positive side of the coil, that's it. There's not a bunch of wire looms or anything crazy for the Pertronix brand, or for the Stromberg brand Pertronix. It looks great, it looks old school, and it runs even better than old school in my opinion. So which one's better? I can't answer that for you, it's up to you. Your situation, your car is going to determine which one is better for you, but that's just the facts and the information for you. Now, that's just the questions I've gotten just this week. A couple of them I actually answered it from the people that are asking them, but I figured I'd start answering these in videos so people who are looking for this information might be able to find it online and not have to wait for me to respond, because sometimes it might be a week. Sometimes I might not see it because it got, you know, buried underneath a bunch of other questions. So I apologize for not getting to everybody's questions, but I hope these videos help. If you have questions about early forwards or flatheads, I can demonstrate things for you in videos. I can upload them onto my YouTube page, and that helps it answer questions for a lot of people all at once. So post your questions down in this comment section, like and subscribe to the channel. And now that you got your question answered, go out in the garage and get your shift together.